year was 1865. I was 13 years old, living in New York City. School had just ended and summer began. I'd received a letter from my cousin the week before, Hank in Oklahoma, asking me to come spend the summer with him. He said, "Come out west where it's wild and free. I've got a horse just for you." He and his family moved out west just last year. I asked my mother if I could go. She said it'd be all right. So I hopped the next train and headed down the track. We had just crossed the Mississippi and headed into Missouri. I looked out the window and the sky grew dark. A band of horses came riding alongside us and the train slowed down. A group of men climbed aboard. They looked rough and ragged. One of them came right up to where I was sitting, looked over at me and grinned a crooked grin, tipped his wide brim hat and flashed his six-shooter. It was none other than Jesse James himself. And man, was I terrified. But it was such a thrill. All of the stories I'd heard were true. As I sat frozen in my seat, the outlaw reached over and pulled a chain from my vest pocket. He flipped open the silver pocket watch my father had given me just before he passed away. It was right before my 8th birthday. The inscription said, "To my son, live your dream." He closed the watch and slid it back into my pocket, tipped his hat again, and went on to the next seat. After the men had taken all they wanted, they left the train and we rolled on. I made it to Oklahoma the next day. After that summer had passed, I said my goodbyes and hopped the train back to where my mother was waiting on me. It was 12 years ago today that outlaw stepped onto my train. And as I sit here staring east, across the plain, I think about what could have happened that day. I reach over and pull a chain from my pocket, just to check the time on that same silver watch. And as I flip it open, I swear I could see a reflection of that outlaw tipping his hat at me one more time. Then I looked down, brushed the dust off the brass star on my chest, turned my horse around and head back to town. To this day, I can still remember that moment when fear and excitement battled for the emotions of a boy. But in my heart, I always knew that I would live my dream just as my father had said, and that one day I'd be headed back west.